Okay, our learning this morning should be in the merits of all those in Israel. Everyone should just be safe. Everyone should be able to come home safe and sound and end to this war and all wars, God willing.
Anybody can share one because we have somebody.
Oh, it looks like most people are sharing already. So, okay. Unless Seth, you want to sit next to me, but I don't know if you want to do that. Okay, so today's Parsha is actually quite a relevant Parsha. It is Parshas Shelach. Parshas Shelach is all about the spies who were sent to the land of Israel to spy on the land. And on the one hand, that is a story that goes back thousands of years. And at the same time, as I think you'll see, there's a lot of resonance to the modern era when we think about our relationship to the land of Israel. Or some of the commentators suggest that the Jewish people cried on the night when they heard the negative reports, right? We know just to quickly summarize the story, just to refresh our memory, the Jewish people go ahead, they're in the desert, God promises them the land of Israel, and they say, okay, but we want to go check the land of Israel out. We want to see what it's all about. And they send spies. The spies come back with this negative report, and the Jewish people are brokenhearted. They are crying over this report, and our tradition has it, the Talmud tells us that the night that they cried was actually none other than, which day of the calendar? Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the same day that the temples were ultimately destroyed. And what they're doing is they're showing a correlation between the destroyed temple, meaning our future exile in some way relates to the sins, the flaw, the failing that took place in this episode. So that means that it's something which still reverberates to this day. It's not just history, it's something which we need to think about, have we, in our generation, have we rectified those missteps of our ancestors? That is the question on the table. So what we're going to have to do is try to understand what their missteps were. And we're going to do something a little bit confusing, so bear with me. What we're going to do is we're going to spend some time, we're going to start at the end of the story, and then we're going to go backward. You'll see, I hope, why we're doing that shortly. So bear with me. I'll just quickly summarize one more time the story. We're going to go to the end of the story, or almost the aftermath of the story, and then we're going to rewind, okay? So imagine you're watching one of these, trippy out there movies, okay, which messes with your mind, or reading a novel, which starts at the end and then goes backwards. Bear with me. That's what we're going to do. It's not going to be chronological, okay? So, again, the short story, Jewish people send spies from the desert to see the land. They come back with a negative report. The Jewish people say, oh no, let's go back to Egypt. And God says, okay, they're going to be punished. When God says they're going to be punished, that is the passage. That's where we're going to begin right now. With that passage where God says they're going to be punished. And I want you to read it carefully. It's all in English today. No Hebrew. It's all in English. I want us to read it carefully. And we're going to read it line by line. And in your mind, and we'll pause after I finish reading, about 20 verses. In your mind, think about any questions that pop up in your mind. Think about any issues you may have with this text. Because there are a lot of oddities about this text. There's something very strange about what we're about to read, and I want to dissect it together. Okay, yes?
Why doesn't he just punish the spies? Why all the people?
Great question. Hopefully we can address that as well. Great question. Okay, so let's jump in. So we're on the first page under chapter 14, and it goes like this. So Hashem, God, said to Moshe, until when or until where will this people provoke me, and how much longer will they have no faith in me, despite all the signs which I have done in their midst? So what does God say? Okay, they don't believe in me, and therefore what? Verse 12, I shall smite them with the plague and annihilate them, and I shall make you, meaning you, Moses, into a greater and stronger people than they. And then there's 3 dots over there because I'm omitting a whole passage where Moshe beseeches God to forgive the Jewish people, and God says, okay, I will sort of forgive them, partially forgive them, and that's verse 20. Hashem said, I have forgiven them just as you spoke. However, just as I live, and the glory of God fills the entire land, for all the people who see my glory and my signs, which I have done in Egypt and in the desert, and they have tested me these 10 times, and they have not listened to my voice. So God is saying over here, I've given so much to the Jewish people. I took them out of Egypt. I split the sea. I dropped man from the skies. I gave them water. I helped repel their enemies. I've done so much, and they keep on challenging. They keep on testing me. So God says, if they will see the land that I've sworn to their fathers, all those who angered me will not see it. So God says, those people who experienced all these miracles, they will not enter the land of Israel. 24, my servant Kalev, because he possessed in him a different spirit and followed me fully, I shall bring him into the land to which he came, and his children will cast its inhabitants from it. So God says there's an exception. The one exception is Kalev. Kalev is one of the 12 spies who we'll learn more about soon, but God says the one exception is Kalev or Caleb, okay? Okay, then the Torah continues, verse 25, the Amaleki and the Canaani are now dwelling in the valley. Tomorrow turn back and you shall travel the desert by the way of the Reed Sea. Now everything should really end over here. The funny thing is, the weird thing is, that the Torah continues. And this is where it's going to get, and hopefully you'll have some immediate questions that come to mind. The next pasuk says, Hashem spoke to Moshe and to Aaron saying, until when will this wicked congregation exist? Those who provoke me, the complaints of Bnei Israel, which they complain against me, I have heard. Say to them, as I live, says Hashem, if I do not do to you as you have spoken in my ears, so I shall do to you. Verse 28, in this desert your corpses shall fall, all of you who are counted according to your numbers, from 20 years and above, because you have complained against me. 29, surely you shall not come into the land to which I raised my hand to swear that I would cause you to live in it, except for Kalev the son of Yefunah and Yoshua the son of Nun. Okay? Your infants about whom you said that they will be as spoils, I shall bring them there, and they will know the land which you despised. Your corpses, yours, shall fall in this desert. 32, your children, they shall be wanderers in the desert for 40 years, and they will bear the burden of your dissoluteness until the last of your corpses are in the desert. 33, according to the number of days which you scouted the land, 40 days, a day for a year, a day for a year, you will bear the burden of your iniquity 40 years, and you will know my displeasure. Okay, questions. We're pausing here. What jumps out at you immediately? Yes?
As we began, Moshe intervened, interceded the people. God says, I have forgiven the people according to your word, and here's the punishment. All of a sudden, in verse 26, he's angry again. What's going on with this people? And so on. Why does it tell the same story essentially twice?
It says the same story twice. Now, I want to give credit to John because all of you have it in blue and red, right? John's looking at an actual original text that's all in black. And I kind of led you on. Very good, John. You get extra credits, okay? So, meaning the blue and red is there to highlight that. God's repeating himself to a large degree, right? It seems, yeah.
The one that's singled out is Kalev.
Okay.
If you look at the other one, it's the two of them.
Excellent, right? So for question number one is, why is God repeating himself? Question number two is, there are seeming discrepancies between version 1 and version 2. In version 1, Kalev is highlighted as the exception. In version 2, Kalev and Yoshua are highlighted. Okay? Think about more questions. Someone forgot to set the AC. I'm dying. I'm just going to turn the AC on, and I'll be right back. Okay, yes. Hold on. Think about it. You're old, I'm sorry.
But that's why, you asked why did he punish all
Okay,
the-
I apologize for those who are cold. I will not.
They didn't believe, they heard the spies, and two of the spies said it's not true. They wanted to hear the bad news, and they believed it.
Okay.
Just as bad.
What else? What other differences are there? Any other discrepancies between that in the blue and that in the red, right? Again, as John pointed out, the blue and the red, verses 11 through 25, is God saying, I'm going to punish the Jewish people. They're going to die in the desert. In verse 26 to 33, God says the same thing. You and I may repeat ourselves. God doesn't presumably repeat himself. There's no need for that, right? Moshe was listening carefully the first time. There's no need to say, I am Hashem your God. By the way, I am Hashem your God. God is not in the habit of repeating himself. Yes?
Okay, in the beginning it says he's forgiven them. And the second thing he says he's giving them their punishment.
Right. I mean, even in the first section, okay, I think you're both highlighting that same point. When God says, God's initial plan is, I'm going to wipe them all out. And Moshe begs for forgiveness. And God says, I'm going to forgive you, but he qualifies it. Even in the first section, God says, okay, I've forgiven them, but then he continues and he says, they're all going to die. It's just they're not going to die immediately, but they're going to die, right? So I just want to point out that even in the first section, when God says I forgive them, it just means that I'm not going to wipe them out right now, but I'm going to let them die out slowly in the desert. Yeah. Okay. Any other discrepancies you see between those two sections? How about another one? Let's look. In the beginning look at verse 11 versus verse 26. How's that? Verse 11, verse 26. What differences are there? Who is God speaking to? Depends which section you're looking at. If you look at verse 11, God's only speaking to Moshe. If you look at verse 26, God is speaking to Moshe and Aaron. Okay? That might be a little bit of a clue. What is the role of Moshe? What is Moshe's primary role? If you see him as an individual on his own, he is Moshe. He is known as Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, our teacher. He's the one who brings us the Torah. When you see Moshe and Aaron together, Their collective role is more about leading the nation. They're the ones who are trying to create and trying to build up and develop a sense of pride, a sense of strength, a sense of who is this as a nation. They are working together to elevate and lift up the people. In other words, when you see them together, it kind of is focused on a bit of a different perspective, less so about, the Torah alone. It's more the Torah is one element of our nationality, of nationhood, but there's another element of just trying to take a group of people who were all slaves, beaten down, and had no sense of self, and trying to lift them up and create a new identity as people who are going to be masters of their own destiny. And that perhaps is the Moshe and Aaron difference. Okay, one other major difference that I could point to, there are others, but one other major one, yes?
This is probably not, but in the first one, he explains why he's so angry, and he said, look what I did for you, and the second one he doesn't talk about it.
Good. In the first one, there is, right, so good.
And the second one,
I would say a little bit different. So in the first one, what does God explain? Rachel, spell that out a little bit more. What does it mean?
They don't have faith, despite the signs.
Despite the signs.
They have no faith in you.
Right. In the second passage,
They said they're just promoting the complaint.
correct. So he's still saying something, but he's saying something different, right? In other words, in the first passage, God is highlighting their lack of faith, their lack of emunah, their lack of belief in God. And we're going to have to come back and understand where is the lack of emunah in what took place over here, which is a matter of much dispute amongst the commentators. In the second passage, it's more about the fact that they are a bunch of krechters. They krechts, they complain. All they do is kvetch, right? This is like classic, every Jewish joke started in this passage over here. God says it first. All the Jewish people do is complain. All they do is complain. Like every Jackie Mason joke started from over here. That is what the Torah seems to be saying, that they are a bunch of kvetchers. It's not about a lack of faith. It's more about the fact that they're childish. They're childish, ungrateful, maybe slave-like. Yeah, yes.
It seems like a metaphor. The president calls in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he down-dresses Admiral so-and-so, and then he sees the Navy chaplain there the next trip, and then he softens his version a little bit.
Okay, so there's version 2 that with Aaron there, God kind of lowers the temperature. Okay, that could be. One other discrepancy that I noticed, again, and there are others, I believe there are others, some are more subtle. In the first passage, God says, I'm going to wipe out the Jewish people, just not immediately. In the second passage, he says it's for those who are 20 and older. Small difference, but it's still a difference. Okay, so with that in mind, what I'd like to do now is actually go back to the original, we're going to rewind. And now we're going to go back to when the Jewish people when the spies come back from Israel and they report to the Jewish people. And now we're going to think about, the story in light of the fact that we saw there are 2 responses of God, maybe highlighting 2 different things that took place. In other words, what I should have done to make this class better, maybe next year, is I should have started by asking you, why did God punish the Jewish people? And we'd say, we'd probably give different answers, but we're seeing already in God's response, it seems like there are 2 things, there are 2 issues, right? And Rachel, you kind of highlighted this. One seems to be a lack of emunah, one seems to be a lack of faith, and one seems to be they're kvetchers. We'll have to understand why is being no one likes people who complain all the time. It's not a very nice thing, but why is that, what's the big issue over there? We'll have to unpack that a little bit more. But I think what we're going to see if we go back to the original story is that the Torah also highlights in the moments how there are 2 things that they did wrong. Okay? In other words, as you see the blue and the red, we're going to parallel that. There's going to be blue and a red when we rewind. There's also going to be a passage in the blue, I'm going to suggest, which we're going to first read, which is going to be parallel to the passage in blue, and a passage in red, which is going to be parallel to the passage in red. You with me? For those listening online, I feel bad. You have nothing to look at. Just bear with me. But okay, that's why you're here in person. Okay, so let's go back. Chapter 13. We're rewinding. Okay, they recounted to him. Okay, this is now telling us the spies come back from the land of Israel, then known as Canaan, and they recounted to him and they said, "We came into the land into which you sent us, and it indeed flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Okay, they come back and they actually are bringing, big fruit from the land of Israel, right? It's always a little bit ironic, famously they carry those big grapes, right? They carry these huge fruit. That's what the Torah tells us. And what is the sign of the Israel tourist industry? Anyone know? Israel tourism, the sign is these big grapes. It's always mind-boggling. Like, do they not know the context of that passage? They were coming to say how bad the land was. Whatever. Anyway, the point is they come back and they say, look, these are its fruits. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. However, 28, the nation is mighty. those who inhabit the land and the cities are greatly fortified to the utmost. And we also saw the offspring of the giant over there. There were giant people there. 29, Amalek dwells in the southern part of the land. The Chiti, Yevusi, and Amori dwell in the mountain, and the Canaani dwell by the sea and next to the Yarden. Okay, so what are they saying? They don't say something explicit, but what do they sound like they're saying? What are they getting at?
Be a war.
It's going to be a war, but what are they saying about the war? They're much more powerful, right? They're not saying it explicitly yet, but they seem to be implying they're much more powerful than us. And the proof to that is the next verse. What does Kalev do? Kalev, who is quote unquote the good guy, Kalev silences the people to hear about Moshe, and he said, "We can alona aleh," as the Hebrew. It sounds much better in Hebrew. We can surely go up to the land, and we shall possess it, for we are surely able to overcome it. Right? Kalev's message is, we can do it. Yes, we can. Right? That is his message. We can overcome. Right? Clearly, the spies were at least implying, no, we cannot. Right? No, we cannot. Let's turn the page, right? But the men who went up with him said, we're now on the second page, verse 31. The men who went up with him said, we are not able to go up against the nation, for they are more powerful than we. Right? We don't have the ability to do so. 32. They spread slander about the land they had scouted to Bnei Israel, saying, the land through which we have passed to scout it is a land which consumes its inhabitants, and every one of the people we saw in it are men of dimensions, meaning big people. There we saw the giants, the sons of the giants of the Nephilim, and we were like grasshoppers in our eyes, and so we appeared in their eyes. Okay, so basically saying, we don't stand a chance. Now, what is the flaw over here? What are they? In what way are they falling short over here?
They're not God. They're not saying that God will help them.
Correct. It is a lack of emunah. It is a lack of faith. Right? God said, I will lead you into the land of Israel. You will conquer the land of Israel. And what do they say? They're too strong. They're too big. They're too fortified. We don't stand a chance. The issue over here is a lack of faith, and which is perfectly parallel, of course, as I mentioned earlier, to the blue above, which was highlighting the lack of faith, right? And this is a message also that goes to whom? Who is the person who is charged with teaching the Jewish people about faith? Moshe. And that's why this passage, verse 11, is directed to Moshe. It's a lack of faith, right? And who is the one who spoke up, who said, no, we could do it? Who is the one who said that? Kalev. And that's why in that passage above, who's the only one who's highlighted in the first passage is Kalev, not anyone else, right? And over there in the first passage, it's about the fact that these people are simply lacking in emunah, and therefore they're going to all die. And God leaves it at that. They're going to die. He doesn't say anything more. We're going to contrast that in a moment with the other passage, but at least at this point, what comes out over here is the issue is a lack of faith, and we can now understand a little bit more why there is a first response. In that first response, God is only addressing their lack of faith. Now, I want to go on a bit of not a tangent, but kind of deepen our understanding of their lack of faith. There's a fascinating debate among the classical commentators about where this lack of faith lies. According to Rashi, you know where their lack of faith, if you were to pinpoint in the story, I'm going to ask you, where in this narrative did you see their lack of faith? Anyone would guess? Which part of the narrative specifically? Okay, I'll tell you. I'm putting yes, go ahead.
We're like grasshoppers in our own eyes.
So that already, many suggest, the train left the station at that point. They're already completely lost it. Rashi says in the first verse of the Parsha, when they went ahead and sent spies, God said you're going to conquer it. What do you mean? Why are you sending spies? God says you got this. What are you doing? And therefore Rashi says that is a lack of faith. Now here's a very interesting debate. Nachmanides, the Ramban says, why is that a lack of faith? Why is that a lack of faith? If God says something good is going to happen, do we not have a responsibility to go ahead and address it in the most normal, practical, natural way fashion possible? In other words, God says you're going to conquer the land. Fine. But don't we have a responsibility, what we call in Hebrew, hishtadlut? Right? There's always this balancing act between emunah, our faith in God, and hishtadlut, our belief. In other words, as Jews, we don't believe, we believe that if someone's sick, there are traditions out there are religions out there, that if someone is ill, what do? You can't go to the hospital, you pray, because it's all in God's hand. That's not how Judaism looks at the world. We look at the world, we say, yes, we have faith in God, and God also is so to speak, partnered up with us, empowered us, and asked us to do something about it. That is the balance between emunah and hishtadlut, the ability to do effort. And therefore the Ramban, Nachmanides, says, no, there was no issue with them sending spies. That was completely justified. Yes, God promised them a land, but they are obligated to go ahead and see how they're going to go ahead and conquer the land. Where do we enter the land? What's the best place to hit first? Do we just walk in and say, hi, here we are? No. You have to strategize. You have to think these things through. How are we going to conquer them? That is a critical question that has to be addressed, and therefore there was no issue with sending them. Nachmanides says the issue was in the, please, sorry, I need it. Okay. Nachmanides says the issue was in the response, when the spies come along and they say, we can't do it, that's where they had that's where the problem lies. In other words, as long as they were going ahead and just looking at strategy, that's legitimate. But as soon as they say, we can't do it, whoa, who gives you the right to say? God says you could do it. You say you can't do it? That is a lack of faith. Okay, so I just want to point out, everyone agrees there's a lack of faith. The question is, where is the lack of faith? Okay, so mistake number one is a lack of emunah, a lack of belief in God. Let's keep on reading though, because the passage is not over. If you continue now, chapter 14, then the Torah continues and says what happens afterwards. The entire community arose and raised their voices, and the people wept that night. They railed against Moshe and Aaron, all of the Jewish people, and the entire congregation said to them, would we have died in the land of Egypt or in this desert? Would that we had died. Why does God bring us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and infants would be as spoils. Is it not better for us to return to Egypt? 4, they said to each other, let us appoint a head, and we will return to Egypt. Okay, so basically what is going on over here in these first 4 verses? They're basically saying, they're demonstrating that they don't have willpower. They don't have a sense of self. They don't see themselves as a nation. They don't see themselves as there's no self-confidence, right? A healthy nation, even if you're a weak nation, if a healthy nation is attacked, what do? You mobilize. There's nothing more invigorating for a nation when they're attacked oftentimes, right? That's meant to invigorate. But over here, they see something that scares them. What do they immediately do? We got to go back, right? It's always, we got to go back. What does that tell us? It tells us that it's not a lack of faith necessarily. Over here, we're seeing another angle, another dimension, which is a lack of wherewithal, a lack of will, a lack of national pride, a lack of self, a lack of, right? All of that is lacking. Okay, so Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces before the entire gathering of the congregation of Bnei Israel. 6, Yoshua, the son of Caleb, the son of Yefunah, and Caleb, the son of Yefunah, who were among those who scattered the land, tore their clothing in grief. And they said to the entire congregation of Bnei Israel, saying, the land through which we have pleased to scout, that land is very, very good. If Hashem desires us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. However, do not rebel against Hashem, and do not be afraid of the nation of the land, for they are as our bread. Right? He's saying it's like bread. It's an expression, like it's something we can just consume them. It's easy to defeat them. Their protection is removed from them, and Hashem is with us. Do not be afraid of them. So here you find whom? You find Moshe, Aaron, Caleb, and Yoshua responding. And they say, effectively, don't be scared. We got this, right? And it makes sense that in chapter 14 on page 1, I'm sorry for all the back and forth, God says 2 people are going to survive. Who are those 2 people? Caleb and Yoshua. Because when it comes to the second flaw, the flaw of a lack of willpower, a lack of faith in oneself, there we find not only Caleb speaking up, but also Yoshua speaks up and tells them, don't be scared. Within that second passage, okay, so again, let's just quickly summarize. I feel like I'm losing some of you, but bear with me. Let's do this. So again, so it seems like if we're dissecting this passage correctly, there are 2 flaws which are highlighted by the Torah. One is a lack of faith in God, okay? And one is a lack, we call it like a faith in themselves, right? Essentially not believing that they have the wherewithal. They don't have the abilities. When God responds to their lack of faith, he says, Moshe, what's going on over here? These people don't have the ability, you didn't teach them well. This nation can't go because how could this nation be my godly nation if they don't believe in me? And therefore says, we're done with. But then regarding the other issue, which is a lack of willpower, where does that come from? Presumably, they were in Egypt. How do you expect someone to have such a radical, the trauma, right? Nowadays, we're more equipped to appreciate, understand what happened. The trauma of not having a sense of self, of being beaten down constantly. How do you then go ahead and overnight become a nation which is supposed to conquer a new land and set up a judicial system and be a light on all those things? It's overwhelming, right? So what does God say in that light? God says, this generation's going to die out, but there's going to be another generation which is born into the desert. It's the people 20 and under who were not born into this into this terrible trauma. They're people who are born into almost the lap of luxury to some degree. Again, they're in a desert, but according to our tradition, they're surrounded by clouds of glory. They're surrounded by this rock that gives forth water. They're surrounded by mun. They have all these gifts. Okay, this is a group of people which are going to be born up with a sense of pride, a sense of self. They are going to be able to conquer the land. They're going to have the self-confidence to conquer the land. Okay? So again,
The slave mentality.
correct. So what we see over here, again, and before we get to like modern times, is two separate issues, two separate flaws. And again, we can start thinking about how does that relate to us in the modern era. But one flaw, one reason they're afraid to go to Israel is because they don't fully believe in God. And the other is they're afraid. They're scared. They don't have self-confidence. They don't believe in themselves. They don't have self-confidence. Those were the two things that held them back from going to the land of Israel. Okay, but here's the interesting thing. The Torah is not done. There's one more passage in this story, a passage which normally gets ignored because we're also focused on the sin, but there is this very strange epilogue to the story, which we're now going to read all the way on the bottom of the second page, okay? Says the Torah, they awoke early in the morning and went up to the peak of the mountain saying, we are ready to go up to the place of which Hashem spoke, for we have sinned. Beautiful. They're saying, guys, we made a mistake. A group of people get up and they say, we realize that we made a terrible mistake. We made a terrible mistake and we are now going to go to the land of Israel. Sounds good, right? Moshe said, no. Why are you now transgressing the word of Hashem? It will not succeed. Do not go up, for Hashem is not among you. And do not die before your enemies, for the Amaleki and the Canaani are there before you, and you will fall by the sword, for you turn from following Hashem, and Hashem will not be with you. Torah continues, the Amaleki and Canaani swooped down, they who were dwelling in that mountain, they smote and crushed those Jews until a place called Hormah. Okay, very interesting epilogue. Immediately after this whole episode, after they hear they're going to be in the desert for 40 years, the Jewish people say, some of them say, we made a mistake, we're going to go. And Moshe says, don't do it. God is not with you. This is not sanctioned by God. Okay? And they continue and they go forward. And what happens, tragically, they die. Okay. What comes out of that last passage, I think, in some ways is even more important than the other passages. Because if you finish reading the first passage up until that last paragraph, you walk away with this notion, the land of Israel is so incredibly important, which is absolutely true, right? We believe, and we spent classes on this before. What is the unique spiritual nature of the land of Israel? There's a whole lot to say, but we all believe that the land of Israel has a certain sanctity, has something incredibly important in the land, and that's why we need to go there. It's special, it's our land, it's our home, it's a place connected to all those things. And here you have a group of people who say, we're going to go to the land. Okay? We believe, we recognize we made a mistake. It is an important place. It's so important. And Moshe says, yes, it's important, but there's always one thing there that you need. And if you don't have that one thing, you got nothing. And what is that? God. There are many who say Israel, I'll tell you, there's a thing you hear sometimes from Israelis. It's very troublesome, and you'll think it sounds comical, but it's a sentiment that you'll find from many Israelis. They'll say, you who live outside of Israel, you need to keep the Torah because you don't have a way of connecting yourself to Judaism. But I live in Israel. I live in Tel Aviv. I live in Jerusalem. I don't need to do mitzvot. I have God. This is Judaism. I live in the land. That is Judaism. And you know what? There is some truth to what they're saying. It's true. Living in the land by definition is a mitzvah, and building up the land is by definition a mitzvah. But that's not what we believe. You do need to have God. You do need to pray. You do need to do the mitzvot. You can't just say, well, I'm here, therefore. And that's what's happening over here. This group of people is the very first group, we'll call them, of secular Zionists, essentially. Basically saying we're going to go to the land and say we're going to ignore God. Again, and Moshe is saying, already then, thousands of years before, Israel without God is not Israel. It's not Israel. It's Eretz HaKodesh. It's a holy land. It's not just our land, it's a holy land. And if you want to go and connect the land without God, you don't have anything at all. So, and this is true, I would parenthetically say, before we point fingers, it's very easy to point fingers at others, this could oftentimes be true regarding many mitzvot. There are people who, they become, so fully focused on one particular mitzvah, whether it's kindness or whether it's Torah learning, and they say, this is it, and they almost lose sight of, why are we doing this, right? People, the Hasidic, early Hasidim used to, mock some Jews. They used to say, you serve the Gemara. The Gemara, the Talmud is your idol, right? I mean, they were being facetious, but they were basically saying, any mitzvah, we could always do mitzvot, and we lose sight of, why are we doing a mitzvah, right? I come to shul, I light Shabbos candles, I do kindness. What's the bigger purpose, right? And that's what this last passage reminds us. As important as Israel is, do not lose sight of God. So quickly to summarize, and I know there's some questions, but to quickly summarize, there are seemingly, three things that are highlighted over here, which are extremely relevant to us to this day. The Rav Kook speaks about, he says that, he says, until we fully appreciate the land of Israel, then that's why we're in exile. Until we get to that point where we fully understand and appreciate and yearn and go to Israel, that's why we're God will leave us in exile. So what are the issues that we need to overcome? One, we need to overcome a lack of faith in God. Do we really believe that God could go ahead and not just conquer the Iranians, okay? But God could go ahead and bring peace to the region, and God could bring us a temple. Do we really believe? It's a question. It's a question we need to answer to ourselves, honestly. Do we really have that emunah, right? Because without that emunah, God says, well, you don't deserve this. You don't deserve that if you don't have that faith. That's question number one. Do we really believe? Again, I know that the Mossad is very impressive and sophisticated, but do we really believe that all those promises that God gave us throughout all of the prophets, that he was going to go ahead and bring complete peace, not just subdue Hamas and subdue Hezbollah and subdue that, no, but to bring real peace, and there's going to be a new world order. Do we really believe in that? That's question number one. Question number two, that's a big calling. Question number two, do we have the faith ourselves? And again, this is, a broader discussion about making Aliyah, but sometimes, the challenge is, well, I want to go, but, I don't know, fill in the blank, all these excuses that we have, and sometimes it's a lack of belief in ourselves. A lack of belief in our capabilities, a lack of belief in, do I really want to go from living in, 3,000 square feet to living in 30 square feet? I don't know, that's not so easy. I don't want to live in a closet. I like my house and yard and whatever it is, and in Israel, everyone lives on top of each other. Whatever the lack of self-confidence may be, but that's also something we grapple with in regards to our service of God, and specifically as it relates to the land of Israel. And lastly, importantly, to think about the land of Israel, not just as a land, but to not lose sight of God in that land. And again, true for Israel and true for all the mitzvot, true for every single one of our mitzvot, to recognize God in that land. Again, do we have the real emunah? Do we have the real faith? Have we rectified the sins of the spies? Do we really believe in all the words of God, in the words of the prophets who told us about that great and grand messianic vision? We have to work on being able to answer 100% in the affirmative. Not so simple. B, do we really have the confidence in ourselves that we're able to overcome and do whatever mitzvot God asks of us? Do we sometimes say, yeah, I know I'm supposed to do this, but I can't not speak Lashon Hara. I can't go to shul. I can't do this level, give this level of tzedakah. Like, it's too much, right? Where sometimes it's a lack of faith in ourselves, in our ability to push ourselves. And lastly, again, do we see God within all the mitzvot, all those values that God gives us? Do we see God, or do we sometimes lose sight of him? Yes.
I was wondering, in the desert, the golden calf was one of the reasons that the 40 years, but this, you're kind of saying it was the spies for the people, for both of them, I guess.
Right. So the commentators, in the Torah itself, there's no mention of the 40 years in the context of the golden calf. The commentators, but you're in good company, you're very good company. The commentators do say that the two are related, that it was the culmination. It was that the two together, God said at this point, we're done. It wasn't just this episode. And really the Torah says that explicitly. God says they tested me over and over again. So it was almost the culmination of all these flaws. So again, you're good company, but the Torah explicitly says the 40 years over here. Yes.
But actually, they never believed, because they were going to, find somebody else and go back to Egypt, and they didn't change their minds until God actually appeared to them. It says here, right? When the glory of Hashem appeared in the tent of meeting to all of Bnei Israel. So there was never a change of faith.
Correct. And ultimately, that's where the new generation is going to come in. A new generation that's born into this faith, because it's hard. It's hard to not only change our behaviors, it's hard to change our attitude. And as a people, we were unable to do so. Okay, I'm going to share with you something which is just because we learned the last passage, so class is over. But I just need to share with you one of my favorite ideas from a Hasidic idea. Okay, so this might resonate with some of you, and others are just going to scratch their heads, and I apologize ahead of time. But I'm going to share with you one last thing. Okay, and that is something from Rav Tzadok HaKohen. I quote him from time to time. He was a great Hasidic teacher, lived about 100 years ago, wrote a whole huge amount of literature, fascinating individual, and he says something fascinating about this passage, the last passage we read. Because in the Hebrew, Moshe says, God said don't go to Israel. God said don't go to Israel, and if you go, vihi lo sitzlach, which means this won't be successful. What he could have said is that you won't be successful. He says, this won't be successful. So what does that mean, this won't be successful? So this is what Rav Tzadok says. He quotes a Talmudic passage. There's a bizarre Talmudic passage. Okay, you ready? This is what it says. It says, and some of you may be familiar with this. It's a very strange passage. It says, Kol ma she'amar lecha bal habayit aseh. Whatever the host tells you to do, you must do. Whatever your host, if you're a guest somewhere, and your host tells you to do something, you must do it. Chutz mitzeh. With the exception of, leave, get out. When your host says get out, you don't have to listen. Right? And you read a passage like this, like, what in the world is it talking about? Right? Again, whatever the host tells you must do, you have to listen. Chutz mitzeh, except if he says get out. What? So if I'm at someone's house and they say I'm gonna throw the food on the floor and want you to eat off the floor without silverware, go. I have to listen to the person. And if they kick me out of the house, they say, okay, you've been staying here quite a while. It's time to go home. No, I don't have to listen. It's bizarre. This passage makes what in the world is it talking about? So Rav Tzadok says beautifully, he says, no. You think the Baal Habayis means you, me, we're hosts. No. Who's the real host? God. Kol ma she'amar lecha Baal Habayit aseh. Whatever God says to you, you must do. You must do. There's one thing that God sometimes will tell you, or that you feel like He's telling you, that you don't have to listen. Sometimes in our spiritual growth, as we go through life, we feel like God is pushing us away. We feel like God is saying, I don't want to. I open the siddur, I try to pray, and I feel like stale. The words are coming out of my mouth. I don't feel connected. I don't feel like God is with me. I feel so distant. I feel so dark. I feel like God is pushing me away. God doesn't want to have anything to do with me. Whatever God says, I have to listen, do all the mitzvos. But when He says get out, when He says move away, when He doesn't give us that inspiration, that connection, I'm allowed to ignore Him. And that's what this passage is saying. The Jewish people over here, symbolically, are trying to go into the house of God. That's what Israel is. They're trying to come close to God. And God says, and Moshe says, don't go. Vihi lo sitzlach. This time you won't be successful. This precise time, God says, it's not happening. But in the future, if you try to go to God's home, and I don't just mean the land of Israel, but you try to connect to God, and you feel like God is pushing you away, God's saying, no, you will be successful. And that's the message, one of the meta messages of this passage. That what we need to take away from over here is that, again, in our course of our life, we're going to feel closer and more distant from Hashem. That's normal, that's natural, that's the way the human mind and human soul works, that we have this up and down and ebb and flow, and that's normal. And sometimes we feel like God is pushing us away. And what Moshe is telling us is that, okay, in the desert, when God said no, He meant no. But in the future, Hilo titzlach, that's the only time you won't be successful. In the future, if you feel like God is pushing you away, you don't have to listen. Keep pushing, keep going, and eventually God will let you in. Don't give up. Even if you feel burnt out, even if you feel like it's so dark around you, keep pushing, and eventually you'll be successful in rekindling that relationship with God. Okay, have a great day, have a beautiful Shabbos, and we'll pick up next week. Yes, John.